Disclaimer: the following content will discuss themes of violence, racism, religious views, animal cruelty, child neglect, child abuse, and the general discussion of Jim Crow lifestyle. I am an outside observer with no skin in the game, and everything discussed is for educational purposes. Enjoy. Donnie, where's the rest of the animation?
It takes 720 frames in a 12-frame animation to create just a 1-minute intro.
This is my final project. Black Boy, written by Richard Wright in 1943 and published in 1945. Black Boy is the third book in the 13 written by Mr. Wright. Black Boy is an autobiography that's split into two parts, Southern Night and The Horror and Glory. Southern Night will be the focus for this analysis. Today I will explore the violent and disturbing journey of Richard throughout his adolescence. The first select chapters of Black Boy will be the first and last time we'll see Richard have a sense of innocence, where every choice he makes is out of raw emotion, unfiltered by outside factors. His decisions derive from what Richard himself wants to do. Richard was 5 years old when he burnt his grandparents' house to the ground, not out of any desire to kill the family or a sick satisfaction of destruction. Richard had burnt the house out of boredom, his mother scolding Richard for playing with his brother. Richard would light the straws of a broom and out of curiosity chose to light the white curtains within the room on fire, his curiosity of wanting to see them burn. As the flames rose on the white curtain, we are given Richard Wright's first emotion, fear. Richard is afraid of how his family will react, and with such an emotion gripping him like a gazelle in the jaws of a lion, he doesn't help wake the other family members who are sleeping. He hides beneath the burning house in Natchez, Mississippi. When his family eventually discovers Richard curled underneath the house, shivering in fear and refusing to come out, his father drags him out from under the house. Richard's mother, Ella, expresses her relief at finding her son, stating to him, "You almost scared us to death," before she beat him with the branch of a tree until he was unconscious. Now living in Memphis, Tennessee, Richard is faced with yet another crucial choice in his early development that's noted within the book. I'm going to warn you, this is, and might forever be, the most disturbing act Richard ever committed within the course of Southern Night. His father, Nathan, working a night shift that requires he sleep during the day, is enraged by the stray kitten that Richard and his brother play with. Annoyed that the cat will not leave the boys alone, Nathan commands Richard, festered with anger at how his father would command him to do this, and while he knew even at a young age that his father wasn't really telling Richard to literally kill the cat, Richard hated that he could never make his father feel his resentment, so he decided to follow his father's demands exactly. Richard hung the animal. In the family's initial shock and anger at Richard's actions, Richard himself was happy. He was happy because now he had managed an outlet to voice his distaste against his father. But Richard's mother traded Richard's emotions. Instead of twisted satisfaction, he would feel crippling shame. She forces Richard to bury a grave for the kitten and pray for forgiveness. Her words and threats about what the dead animal would do to Richard had sparked in his mind the idea that it could live again and seek retribution, terrifying the young boy so much that he had nightmares of it days onwards. His actions did not come without further consequences. Soon after Richard's decision, his father would become completely absent early on in his life, leaving the entire family, parting only one gift to Richard: hunger. For Richard, hunger isn't just the desire to eat because of an aching feeling in his stomach. Hunger is something that takes root within him, forever present throughout all of his struggles, irritating and presenting Richard with a concept in his life that he will become acquainted with very soon. While his mother works at a restaurant, Richard watches rich white folks dining and feasting on an abundance of food, while he, a black young boy, sits by hungry, wondering why they get to eat and he doesn't. In just a few short pages to this novel, Richard Wright has set the tone. Even as a child, we're given an insight to his thought process, why he makes the choices he does. His emotions are raw and unfiltered by the outside world. The consequences he faces making these choices, and the situation he suffers from his father's absence, along with key observations, provides a transition from raw, unfiltered emotions to a subdued personality later on in the novel. There are 3 factors to consider when discussing the change in behavior for Richard: relation, religion, and racism. The 3 of these factors have a key emotion tied to them. The first factor is relation. Throughout the novel of Black Boy, there are many events that occur between Richard and members of his family. 2 events of note will be discussed. In Chapter 4, Richard, his mother, and his brother have to return to Mississippi, this time in Jackson, living with their grandmother once more. She is an extremely devout Christian, whose strict rules based on a religious background will be discussed later. Will be discussed later on. The key character to note is Richard's Aunt Addie. Aunt Addie shares the same commitment to Christianity as the rest of the family. Working as a teacher within a religious school, Richard is enrolled into the same institute at age 12. His relationship with Aunt Addie is one that shows the first glimpse into how Richard chooses to respond to family members that treat him harshly. One day in class, when Richard is accused of eating, Aunt Addie seeks to discipline Richard in front of everyone as a way to reinforce her authority. She is further angered by Richard referring to her as Aunt Addie instead of Mrs. Wilson. After whipping his hand with a ruler, she threatens further punishment when they return home. Richard, however, had different plans, affirming to himself that he wouldn't allow Aunt Addie to beat him again. Once they arrive home, a fight ensues between the two. Richard, in a fit of both rage and fear, pulls a knife on his aunt, threatening to cut and even kill her when they continue to fight. Luckily, no one is killed, and Richard doesn't stab his aunt either, but his description of the fight is enough.
I bit her hand and we rolled, kicking, scratching, hitting, fighting as though we were strangers, deadly enemies fighting for our lives.
This wouldn't be the last time that Richard would stoop low to the behavior of a cornered animal, willing to destroy itself in the sake of ending the life of its attacker. Later on, during Richard's stay at his grandmother's house, more family members come. Another key member of the family being Uncle Tom, no relation to that cabin guy. One day, the uncle simply asks Richard for the time, in an exchange that appears to be quite normal.
What time have you? Huh? What time have you got? 18 past 5. 18 past 5? Yes, sir. Now, is that the right time? It's right. If it's a little slow or fast, it's not far wrong. What on earth do you mean, boy?
In just one simple comment, Richard has been forced into another conflict with a family member. Uncle Tom took offense to Richard's comment. Now, I'm going to be honest, and let this be completely unrelated to what I'll say. I have no idea what Uncle Tom got mad at here. Not even Richard has any idea. And it's not really commented on, and it can't really be expressly shown through the dialogue. But apparently Richard had shown sass to the uncle. I'm only just saying this because the next things that ensue can kind of really show how outlandish the family relations between Richard and, well, his family can become. Now, that's besides the point. Richard believed he did nothing of the sort wrong, and he didn't want to be beaten by his uncle as the man threatened. Richard decided then and there to take things to the extreme. When they met in the backyard where Uncle Tom would have attacked Richard, Richard pulled from his hands 2 razor blades and held them within his knuckles in a fist, threatening to cut Tom.
If you touch me, I'll cut you. Maybe I'll get cut too, but I'll cut you. So help me God.
Richard's anger has once again become so great, he's willing to violently defend himself against his family members when they try to assert their dominance over him. And despite how these people begin to view him, Richard doesn't care. The way their perspective changes for Richard does not matter.
You end on the gallows. If I do, you'll have nothing to do with it.
The emotion tied to the concept relation is anger. This isn't the only time Richard has gone off the deep end. Before, he caused his grandmother to nearly break her spine when she tried to hit him for a slight. And for Aunt Addie, He had vowed to kill her if she had tried to get him in his sleep after a previous fight where he threatened her with a bread knife. This caused Richard to sleep with a knife under his pillow nearly every night. Richard's approach to any violence from his family is escalation. Anger so boiling and hot that it evaporates any of the love or consideration his family had for him, the exception being his mother. Richard notes at one point that whenever his brother had finally returned, and even when they have been separated for so long, people had treated Richard's brother with reverence, while he became an outcast within the family. The next concept is religion. For Richard, religion was a force in his life that prevented him from certain freedoms. As I've mentioned before, Richard's grandmother was a devout Christian. Her faith and practices are so committed that whenever Richard was trying to apply for jobs over the weekend, he had been refused by his grandmother to work, referencing the importance of the Sabbath. This would implement the idea early on for Richard that religion was something that only served as an obstacle, a barrier between him and his future, the outside world. However, religion would also introduce Richard to the feeling of disappointment, disappointing his families, disappointing his peers, disappointing members of the church. When Richard had begun to dabble in the works of fiction, writing himself his own personal story that he managed to have published to a newspaper, instead of receiving praise and compliments for his efforts, he received criticism and disdain. His grandmother, who referred to Richard's works as worldly, a term she used to disrespect many means of entertainment, seeing them as the devil's work, associated Richard's short story with the same level of prejudice. The family now believed that Richard needed to be saved, as they put it. Time and time again, when Richard's friends or family would try and convert him to being a committed member of the church as a way of bridging the gap and accepting Richard, he would turn these efforts down. Richard related religion to the same idea as a tribe. If the tribe were to refuse Richard, he would be alone, and he realized such when commenting this during his baptism. This disappointment would grow within those around Richard, can be displayed through this simple exchange.
Richard, do you know we are all worried about you?
Worried about me? Who's worried about me?
All of us.
Why?
You're not saved.
I'm alright.
Don't laugh, Richard. It's serious.
But I tell you that I'm alright.
Say, Richard, I'd like to be a good friend of yours.
I thought we were friends already.
I mean true brothers in Christ.
We know each other.
We're not in Christ.
Friendship is friendship with me.
But don't you want to save your soul?
I simply can't feel religion.
Have you really tried to feel God?
No, but I know I can't feel anything like that.
You simply can't let the question rest there, Richard.
Why should I let it rest?
Don't mock God.
I'll never feel God. I tell you, it's no use.
Would you let the fate of your soul hang upon pride and vanity?
I don't think I have any pride in matters like this.
Richard, think of Christ's dying for you, shedding his blood, his precious blood on the cross.
Other people have shed blood.
But it's not the same. You don't understand.
I don't think I ever will.
Oh, Richard. Brother, you are lost in the darkness of the world. You must let the church help you.
I tell you, I'm alright.
Come into the house, and let me pray for you.
I don't want to hurt your feelings.
You can't. I'm talking for God.
I don't want to hurt God's feelings either. I'm sorry.
Say that. God may never forgive you.
For Richard, religion was an absolute for him. It was the barrier between him and the outside world. He viewed it as a prison, his family the wardens and officers that caged him. But it wasn't just this black and white worldview of
Very black and white.
You think you're funny? No, that's okay. Don't worry about it. See, while I've tried to put it off for the longest, here's the final factor in Richard's life where his emotions would conflict almost every single day. The biggest elephant in the room right now pertaining to this book. Racism!
Racism is the final concept, one where it would be the death of Richard's emotional freedom. Throughout his life, he was given subtle hints to the world and the structure that he occupied, what was right and wrong in the way of life. While he did have a fear implemented early on of white people, after hearing a story of a white officer beating a black boy to death, Richard wouldn't truly know what emotional bearing the relationship between whites and blacks would mean until he began to look for work. At every notable event, Richard discovers truly how much white people hate him, simply for his skin color. He is reminded almost every day that whenever he encounters a white person, any hint, any notion that Richard believes himself to be equal to them is met with violence or the threat of. In Chapter 9, when Richard is walking his bike home one morning, a group of white men in a car offer to drive him to his destination. Through a minor exchange where Richard declines a drink, reinforcement of hatred is made.
Want a drink, boy? No. The words were barely out of my mouth before I felt something hard and cold smash me between the eyes. It was an empty whiskey bottle. I saw stars and fell backwards from the speeding car into the dust of the road, my feet becoming entangled in the steel spokes of the bicycle. The car stopped, and the white man piled out and stood over me.
Ain't you learned no better sense than that yet? Ain't you learned to say sir to a white man yet?
Another notable exchange was when Richard was walking home with a young black woman. As they passed by a white cop, the white cop... Although Richard took offense to this initially, the white officer affirmed their positions in life by pulling a gun on Richard and forcing him to agree that he liked what the white man did. The concept racism, the emotion tied to it, is discussed, and it goes both ways. Richard experiences how white people view him, as no more than an animal. Throughout Richard's life, when he's faced with conflict, he responds violently, always escalating the situation. He refuses to let others force him into actions he doesn't enjoy, but because of his fear of white people implanted within him early on, whenever he's faced with their cruelty, Richard is unable to do anything more than take it. Over time, Richard transitions from a troubled and ferocious youth that still has many passions he wishes to pursue, and they begin to spark positive emotions within him. But through the oppression of the Jim Crow society within the South, enforced by whites and blacks alike, Richard loses himself slowly. Towards the end of Southern Night, Richard does manage to find freedom again, and his decision to finally flee the South no matter what, moving to Chicago with his family. But that decision took Richard 13 long, grueling years of suffering, just to find himself once more.
Do you know where I can find a job? Yes. I know where you can find a job. Where? But I wonder if you can hold it. What do you mean? Where's the job? Take your time. You know, I know you. You've been trying to hold a job all summer and you can't. Why? Because you're impatient. That's your big fault. Well, I wish to heck I could talk to you. I think I know what you want to tell me. Do you want to get killed? No! Then for God's sake, learn how to live in the South. What do you mean? Let white people tell me that? Why should you? See, there it is now. It's in your face. You won't let people tell you things. You rush too much. I'm trying to help you and you won't let me. Look, you're black. 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 See? Can't you understand that? Sure, I understand it. You don't act like it. How did you know that? White people make it their business to watch and they pass the word around. Now my boss is a Yankee and he tells me things. You're marked already. Then tell me, how must I act? I just want to make enough money to leave. Wait, and I'll tell you. What's the matter with you? I'm teaching you how to get out of the white people's way. Do you see what I mean? White people want you out of their way. I know what you mean. Look, I'm training you like a brother. You act around white people as if you don't know they were white, and they see it. Oh, Christ, I can't be a slave, but you've got to eat. Yes, I've got to eat. Then start acting like it. When you're in front of white people, think before you act. Think before you speak. Your way of doing things is all right among our people, but not for white people. They won't stand for it. I guess you're right. I've got to watch myself, break myself. No, you know, you may think I'm an Uncle Tom, but I'm not. I hate these white people. Hate them with all my heart, but I can't show it. If I did, they'd kill me. Once I heard an old drunk say, all these white folks dressed so fine, That smell just like mine. That's how I feel about him. There's an optical company upstairs, and the boss is a Yankee from Illinois. Now, he wants a boy to work all day in summer, mornings and evenings in winter. He wants to break a colored boy into the optical trade. You know algebra, and you're just cut out for the work. I'll tell Mr. Crane about you, and I'll get in touch with you. Do you suppose I can see him now?
For God's sake, take your time!
Maybe that's what's wrong with Negroes. They take too much time.